Hello, guys. Hey, I'm just going to give you guys a few minutes to hop on. If anybody is on or as you're coming on, just give me a wave, a comment. Let me know that you can hear me, see me. Good morning. Hello, hello. If you guys can hear me, see me, give me a wave. I'm going to get started. All right, welcome, guys. Welcome back to Shifting the Healing Mindset. This is day 2, where we're going to talk about freeing the generational patterns. And I'm really excited because this has been really cool work. It's been really fascinating to hear the stories and watch the healing and experience it myself with how deeply these patterns can run and how shifting ourselves and healing ourselves creates this ripple effect to help shifting our children, our partners, our parents, our siblings, our extended families. Really, really, really fascinating work. And it's been something that's been being studied for hundreds of years, which is also something that's really amazing because we're just starting to hear about it, right? And it's funny how that happens, how things are not spoken about until, they get out to the right people, where then you hear all about it, right? So a lot of times as we're doing big healing work, as we're recognizing patterns in ourselves, in our mental and emotional space, in our physical space, we come up to these like walls and these moments where we're thinking, this isn't my stuff, right? I have this fear of the ocean, but I never had a bad experience with water, right? It can be something as simple as that. Or, I feel really triggered and afraid around new people and new spaces, and I don't really have a reason why, right? So a lot of this comes from generational ties, okay? We were speaking yesterday about children who have eczema when the families are doing everything they can to be holistic, to be, choosing the right foods, doing all of the right vitamins, like walking the path that is supposed to give you success, right? It's supposed to keep you healthy. It's supposed to keep your body strong. Yet the baby has rashes, or the kids start developing asthma, or, something comes up where there's recurring bronchitis. They're always getting sick, right? So in our homeopathic review yesterday, right, we were looking at how there's so many different layers that play into this experience, this unwinding, right, and this healing work, but also in the susceptibilities, in the ways that we get stuck. There's so many layers, and one of them is this generational path, right, these ties that we get stuck into. So today I want to start jumping into some of that. A lot of you have been hearing this buzzword of epigenetics, right? That's been a really common one. There's a really cool book that I definitely recommend if you like workbook style books, called It Doesn't Start With You, and it's wonderful. It's really cool to work through and read about how the epigenetic patterning can pop up throughout your life, right? How it can have a hold on you. And we're going to think of this in a few different angles, okay? So epigenetics is, right, this study of illness and how it passes through family lines, through the generations. We can see, mental illness flow through. We can see physical illnesses flow through. In homeopathy, we have been studying this for hundreds of years, and it was known as miasms, and it is known as miasms, right? The miasmatic cord that's running through the family line gives us often a lot of like clues to figuring out what's happening, what's going on. Some really cool ones are that I find fascinating and I see a lot in practice are right families who had to flee a country, who felt like they had gotten to a point in their life where their family wasn't stable in that country that they were in for whatever reason, where they had to pack up and leave. Okay, and then they had to come somewhere else. There is this miasm that's a tubercular miasm, right? And there's, especially in certain countries, there was tuberculosis, which was one of the reasons people were up and leaving, right? And getting out of a country so that they could, not get sick, but they were getting sick anyway, right? And it has this tie to wanting and needing to get up and move. So what happens is then down the line, children are born and getting these tubercular-like illnesses, asthma, recurring bronchitis, stuff that lingers in the chest, coughs that go to the chest, right? And it's actually physically imprinted in their bodies, right? So tomorrow we'll talk more about fascia and how the body holds these stories, but our bodies are literally contorting around these generational patterns and creating these patterns, these moments, these things that come up, right? Whether they're emotional, mental, physical. So we want to keep an eye on those lines. If you guys have your workbook out, take a look at the first question on there. Let's start thinking about what is it that my family had gone through, right? What is that line that is like the thread of my family? And remember that sometimes it's something super simple, right? Families get up and move all the time, right? Does your family tend to be nomadic? They don't want to settle down. Are they really rigid? And my family like grew up, were raised, and stayed in like this one little township area, right? And it took a lot for people to start branching out and moving very recently, right? A lot of people have that in their family line. A lot of people have like these limiting beliefs within their family story, right? How many times do you hear somebody saying like, oh, my family doesn't do that. My family doesn't travel. My family doesn't, right? It doesn't work out. We're not like that, right? We can't do that. We can't run, right? We like pigeonhole ourselves and hold on to that thread of our family, which our family stories are so beautiful. They're needed. Even the stuff that feels painful is necessary, right? It's necessary for growing. It's necessary to use as a catalyst to our own healing, to our own evolution, but it can stunt us, right? It can hold us back if we allow it to. So these stories, right, can sometimes create these susceptibilities, like we were talking about the tubercular miasm settling in the chest, right? And creating things like asthma, recurring bronchitis, right? There's some susceptibilities where families will notice that they tend to get skin issues, right? The kids get eczema no matter what they do, no matter what, how healthy their family is, how great they're eating, what they did during their pregnancy, right? Still comes up. Okay, so sometimes these things are susceptibilities. There are these little spaces in our health, in our systems that are weakened because of our generational ties, because of these patterns that we have with our families. Okay, but we can shift them. Okay, we can shift them, and that is what's so exciting about these newer studies of epigenetics, is recognizing that it's not set in stone. It's not that this is how it has to be, and that you are just one day gonna get heart disease. That's not how this works. We are capable of healing. We are capable of shifting. We are capable of moving through these ties and these patterns and breaking them and breaking free. Okay, so these patterns can also be stuff like a family history of abuse, right? So when you're looking at that first question, let's think, what is it? And sometimes it's the more secretive stuff, right? That maybe you don't know about, but you feel it, right? So even if it's that, this workbook is for you. Jot it down. I'm curious if my family has had a history of this because this was my experience, right? Because oftentimes there is a strong line of it, right? And we talk more about this in some of my bigger classes of like why and what this looks like and the parts that each person plays in this dynamic to keep the cycle going, right? Because that's what happens when we have a family that has a line of addictions, right? Whether it's drugs or alcohol or something else, right? When there's addiction in a family, we start to create these dynamics where there's, maybe somebody who is not an addict, but who is enabling and supporting them because they don't want to see them fail, because they want to make sure they're taken care of, because they're scared, because, right, they are the caregivers. There's, the one who wants to break off and just totally wants absolutely nothing to do with the family until they get their stuff together, right? There are the addicts. There are the ones who are fully supportive and helping with whatever is going on, right? There's all of these roles that can be played, and they're part of that generational pattern, right? Each one goes off to start a new generation with their new family of another cycle like that, unless you break out of that role, unless you break out of that pattern, right? So I, for example, have a family history of addiction. There's a strong line of addiction in both sides of my family, right? And although my parents didn't bring addiction into the house, what they did bring was the caretaking mode, right? The martyrdom, the need to take care of other people and sacrifice themselves to keep other people afloat while they were sinking, right? So this creates another dynamic where then you're more susceptible to inviting addiction back into the household, right? It creates this new pattern, and we have to be aware of them, right? So bringing awareness to these family patterns, to the things that have happened throughout history in your family, right? In your ancestry is so important. Just bringing awareness to it allows you to recognize the role you're playing so that you're able to step out of it, right? So that you're able to take that step. And if it feels too hard, right, then you have support. You have a homeopath to go to. You have a counselor. You have therapists, right? You have support systems. They have great programs for even family members of addiction, family members of abuse, right? To help you learn how to shift those dynamics and come out of that. But what we spoke about yesterday, right, was that we're losing that gem of storytelling. We're losing that family nourishing of sharing our experiences, sharing our grandparents' experiences, right? Sharing the experiences of our aunts and uncles, not in a way to shame people or, where often we will see people sharing stories because they're like, oh yeah, look what they did, right? And that it's terrible. That's why we don't speak to them anymore, right? We have this like division and create these tiers of like hierarchy of who's good and who's not, when realistically we all have our stuff, right? We all are stuck in our patterns. We are all hitting walls and need to shift somehow, right? And we need to speak about all of it. We need to be sharing that because it's going to help us process it, right? And it's also going to help our children start at an elevated state. Our children are going to be able to have, one step up because they've heard the stories, right? And even if they make the mistakes and follow in those steps, they're going to be able to spot them. They're going to be able to be aware of them, right? It's so often that you don't recognize something in yourself until you're sitting in a class like this and you're like, oh my God, that's me, right? Or you're reading through a really great book and you're like, holy cow, I didn't even realize I do that, right? It's because we're sharing stories. It's because you're reading other people's stories. Wouldn't it be beautiful if we can bring that back into a family, right? Into the family world where we're sharing it, we're allowing this experience, we're teaching ways to process things, right? And this is a full body experience. It is more than just the discussions. It's more than the mental and emotional things. It is a physical processing, right? And we'll get more into that physical processing tomorrow, but these generational lines flow through our systems, right? So let's tap in a little bit to these patterns and how they manifest in the bodies, right? In our bodies, and then how we pass them on to our children. Okay, so if you guys have ever heard or seen a family who all talk the same, right? They take on the same mannerisms, the same body positions, they laugh the same, right? We see it so often, or oh my God, you do that just like your grandfather, right? Part of our learning and our evolution is mirroring each other. So even husband and wife will start to mirror each other. Okay, so our children are mirroring us. So whether or not they have been through an experience, they will be picking up on your patterns. Okay, and that's where it gets really confusing, because if you don't explain to them, this is why I get into this state, this is why I'm working on processing this, right? Then they feel really confused when they're in this body position. Okay, so let's take a look at a little bit of body positioning, right? We'll talk more about it tomorrow, but a really common body position to take when there's been a history of sustained stress, right? So it can be sustained stress of any kind, is this fear pattern, right? Bringing the shoulders around, curling around the body, right? If you've downloaded my free ebook on my website, we talk about a bit of this, of what this pattern is, the fear pattern of pulling down on your fascial body, protecting your neck, protecting your abdomen, protecting your groin, right? These really sensitive spaces. Our body naturally pulls into this pattern when it's in a fear pattern, when it's stuck in a fear pattern. And we pass this through our generational line through mirroring. Children are watching their parents, are watching their grandparents, are watching the people who are older than them and mirroring it, whether they're consciously doing it or not, right? They learn by mirroring. Okay, so they're taking on this body position, and then what happens is this body position is reflecting to your nervous system that I'm in a fear state. I'm in a fear state. I have something to be anxious about. I am depressed. I feel exhausted. Right? So this feedback loop is going to create those feelings in the body, in the person, right? It's going to create those mental and emotional states, and it's all because of the body positioning, right? So this is similar even with, old injuries, okay? Old injuries, old traumas. Your body takes a form around that in a guarding position, okay? And then your children are mirroring that, right? Your spouse is mirroring that. And mirroring can be a wonderful technique for helping you shift and grow out of something, but only if you bring awareness to it, right? Only if you bring the awareness in with the mirroring and say, hey, look, this is what that looks like. This is why that's happening, right? Now we can shift it. We're not able to shift it when we are, not able to recognize it, when we don't see it. Okay, so really, really important to pay attention to the patterns that we're holding and storing in our bodies, to the patterns that we're holding and storing in our minds, in our, emotions. What are Write down in your workbook, right? And the second question, write down, what are the patterns that we share in our family, whether you have kids or not, right? What do your parents share with you? What are those things that you say, oh, this just runs in the family, right? It's wonderful to be aware of the susceptibilities that we have running through our families, because that's a really good way to keep an eye on it, to keep it in check, right? To make sure that you are doing the things you need to do to support yourselves, right? Remember, everything is so individualized. We want to make sure that each person has a level of care that respects and honors them, right? Their perspective, their generational ties, the traumas that they've gone through, right? And when I say trauma, we'll talk about this again tomorrow, I mean trauma from your perspective. It doesn't have to be this, what they call now big T trauma, right? This big moment that shifted your life completely, because trauma looks different for everybody, right? And it's an experiential thing. It's my world was shaken from this state, and now my body is reacting, right? We want to be watching that. We want to be making sure that we understand what that looks like. We want to know that we can recognize it, because then we can make that shift. Then we can start transitioning out of that space. Okay. So, generational patterns. I really, really, really love the book. It Didn't Start With You, because it gives you the background, right, that some of you might be looking for. It gives you the background on why this stuff is happening, what other ways that can look like, right? So if you guys start reading that book, please let me know, because I'll walk through it again with you. I really, really enjoy that book and enjoy, understanding how these things are working through families and how they're manifesting in the physical body, how they're manifesting in each person and how it differs, right? Because as we spoke about yesterday with the homeopathic principles, right, everybody experiences things differently. So although I see these generational patterns that look really familiar through different bodies, and I can say, oh, I can feel that there's this fear pattern, that there's this sustained stress pattern. I can feel this guilt. I can feel the shame, right? I feel these body patterns and positions that we're working on processing through, or typically we're stuck in, right? I can feel those patterns there. I cannot feel how that experience is for you until we start the discussion, right? Until we start working through, what does that look like? What does that feel like? How is this going to be? How is processing this going to be accessible for you, right? And a lot of that comes with fascial work, right? Because a lot of it is unspoken. A lot of it feels like it can't be shifted, right? We might have a moment that we know of, right? We've had this same toxic cycle happening over and over and over again for years and years, and we know that it's there, but it keeps popping up, right? And we just don't know how to move past it. We've seen the therapists, we've spoken to doctors, we've taken the medications, we've tried the remedies, right? And we're still getting stuck in that pattern. Sometimes it's locked in the body, right? Just like that fear pattern that holds you in that perpetual state of anxiety and depression and sadness. It's the same thing. These generational patterns can get locked and stored in the body, where then it makes it really difficult to break through, right? So these can even be relationship patterns, right? The way that we relate to people around us is often mirrored from our families. Okay, so we'll see, the same type of flow happening through families. And if we can be self-aware, if we can bring our awareness in, we may recognize that the cycle is that You know, my aunt used to do the same thing where she was attracting such terrible men, right? Such terrible friends who were taking advantage and being abusive and not being, you know, kind and standing in integrity. What is it? Why can't I break out of that? Right? Let's be self aware. Let's recognize why with us that's happening, right? What cycle are we stuck in that we need to shift out of so that we can grow into a space where then we're attracting new people, new relationships, new situations, right? Sometimes it's generational. Sometimes it's not something that you have been through. It's not something that, you know, directly happened to you, right? I'm really curious about the partner relationship, right? What happens when somebody who's been really traumatized marries somebody who's had a really wonderful life, right? Hearing the stories of trauma and holding space for somebody that's gone through something that you don't understand can be traumatizing, right? And send them into a spiral and swept up into the same pattern that you're in, right? And then moving through that can look difficult, right? Because it's unspoken. They can't put words to the feelings that they're feeling, to the ways that that's being expressed, to the way that their body is taking shape. There's, you know, I've worked on husbands who I can feel the fear, the shame, and they're like, no, my life was good, right? But then I work on the wife and find out their story, and it makes you wonder, right? What is it that you're filling a space for somebody else when you come into a relationship with them, right? Be that a friend, you're filling the space that they leave. So what happens when we change ourselves, when we are working and healing on ourselves, is that we change the space that we're giving for people to take up in our lives, in our relationship, right? And sometimes that can look really messy because sometimes they're like, hey, I was there. I was taking up that space. You know, I was doing that for you. And that's where we can meet with some defensiveness and some, you know, growing pains where then you're like, no, I'm going to take that back. You know, that's part of me that I really, really wanted to be standing in. So I'm going to take that back and you can move over a little bit, right? We see a lot of that, a lot of like growing pains and things where when relationships start shifting, it feels kind of messy, right? And growing feels messy to begin with. Healing feels messy. It doesn't always feel good, right? A lot of times when we're doing it gently and treading through it, we don't recognize that it's happening because it's so gentle. But we also don't recognize that it's so gentle because it looks so messy on the surface, right? There's so much that comes up when we deal with, especially generational stuff, right? When you start healing your wounded spots or your body patterns or your emotional and mental patterns that then you realize was passed on from, you know, like generations before you, you can get a lot of emotions coming up, right? You can feel really resentful, really angry, really sad for the experiences that you've had because, you know, of family events, right? Because of other people not doing their work to process things, right? And that's why we're here. That's why we're here doing this work, because we've forgotten to do that work, right? Or these last few generations, we have been really focused on other types of growth, right? Other types of building, you know, we've gone through the industrial age and, you know, building homes and trying to be these perfect images that we were taught were needed, right? And we forgot that we need to be in ourselves, right? We need to keep reflecting back and growing and not getting stunted because it hurts, you know, the people around us. It hurts ourselves. We're not able to continue growing and healing if we stop being self-reflective, if we stop bringing awareness to those things, right? So I did want to go back to the relationship aspect of this, right? And recognizing that when we come together, right, with friends, with families, with children, right, with our partner, we're merging many different family lines, right? That's another area where it can get really messy, right? So when you're looking at your workbook and you're writing down like what's coming through the family line, now go and write down what's coming through your partner's family line, right? Your best friend's family line. What's happening there? Because sometimes that is where things get really tricky, because you're holding stuff for somebody else, they're holding stuff for you, right? And if we let this get all muddled, right, then it feels really difficult to untangle as things keep progressing, right? So if we can start now and start finding those lines, we're bringing awareness to the patterns that are there, and it's going to make healing easier. Okay, it's going to make healing your stuff easier. It's going to help other people heal stuff easier. But we want to make sure that while we're working through this process, while we're untangling all of these patterns, we're allowing the space for ourselves to do this healing, because it doesn't happen quickly, right? It doesn't happen right away. When we're healing from simple traumas, when we're healing from larger traumas, when we're healing from generational ties that aren't ours, it's really difficult. We need space, and we need to grant space for other people to do that work as well, right? So what we like to do is, we've come away from it recently while we're in our busy time of growing new businesses and doing all the things we want to be doing, right? We've come away from hosting and having these family circles where we can bring together the stories of each of our families, right? And have these discussions with the children of like what these experiences look like. What are the lessons that we've learned? And remember, when you're discussing these things, you don't have to be sharing the full picture, right? And don't share until you're healed enough that you can, bring it down to a child's level, right? And a lot of us are really conscious of how we share things with our children, and we're actually undersharing, right? But we can be more forthcoming and help children understand that, like for me, when we were in Bali, it was really upsetting for the kids when the rest of the kids were off running free, right? Just going off to their friends' villas, traveling up and down the roads in Bali. Like, it was such a beautiful community time, right? And my kids, I was like, no, you have to stay close. I can't handle that, right? And that's where the stories came. That's where the stories came up of, I need you to understand why this is really hard for me so that you can respect this boundary that I'm making, right? And not feel resentful about it, not feel like it's, and maybe they will feel that way, but they tend to be more understanding. And then they're learning something. They're learning what, when it's time for me to go forward and have this experience, then what are the things I should be looking out for? What are the things I should be mindful of? What are the things I should be taking care of, right? So generational patterns are really sticky. They're really deeply ingrained, right? I am running another program that I will post about tomorrow that we've done a few times already, and it's wonderful because we talk about the patterns that come through that family line, right? We talk about what causes a people pleaser, what's causing, the rebellious types who want to just break free from their families, right? What that looks like, what it feels like in the body, right? We talk about the people who are attention seeking, okay? And we're not placing shame on people for this because it is often a necessary space that they need to bring awareness to and start growing, right? It's really upsetting to me to see how much this word like narcissism is overused, right? It's a diagnosis. It is not something that should just be slapped on everybody that we see, because a lot of times, right, it's somebody who is attention seeking, who needs to be filling a space that wasn't filled for them for a really long time, typically their entire life, right? So it's somebody that we need to be extending compassion to and holding them in a space where they are able to start healing, right? Where they are able to see and be inspired by the other people who have healed around them, right? And that's the kind of things we see when we start shifting, okay? When you start doing the healing, you become this, this inspiration. You become the ripple effect, right? You start spreading this understanding that we're not stuck. We can change, right? We can shift. We can grow. We don't have to be this person anymore, right? And sometimes we get so stuck up in that that's just how people know me. So now that's where I'm comfortable, right? What would it look like if I totally changed who I am and how I show up in the world? That feels really intimidating. That feels really scary. It feels like you're going to have to do a lot of explaining, right? But storytelling is wonderful, right? It's so helpful for other people. It's so encouraging and inspiring. But also, you don't have to explain yourself, right? Often when you show up in a new way, people feel inspired and they want to do the change, right? They want to move with you. They want to heal with you. They want to grow. And that's really cool. And it's really cool to see it in your children, in your partner, in your family, right? I've had experiences where I was taking remedies for I'm trying to think of what it was even for. It was actually a remedy made from breast milk. So that can tell you a little bit about the family line, right? If you think about breast milk and the process of homeopathy where we're healing like with like, it's this lack of nourishment, this lack of mother bonding, this lack of feeling taken care of and supported in a way that makes you feel wholesome and allows you to grow and, spread your wings, right? So sometimes when you're in this mother wound, right, which we hear about a lot, you can feel like there's this lack of mothering, this lack of support, right? And whether it's true or it's just in your perception doesn't matter because it's your own experience, right? But I was taking this remedy for whatever the symptoms were. And as I'm taking this remedy, working through processing this feeling of not being taken care of in the way that I needed to be, I had a phone call from my mother who was like, hey, I wanted to let you know that I just spoke with my mother, right? My grandmother she was speaking with. And I recognized that I was feeling like she wasn't showing up for me in these ways. So I needed to apologize to you for not showing up for you in those ways, right? So me taking this remedy, me showing up in a new way, right? I didn't mention this stuff. I don't mention even half of the remedies that I'm taking or the states that I'm in, right? At this point especially, I'm like, I'm good. I'm just moving through it all, right? But I was able to recognize that my shift, right? The way that I was showing up in my energy, in my body, was able to unlock patterns in my mother's line, right? In the way that my mother was relating to me, in the way that my mother was relating to her mother. And it was healing in this deep generational trend. That's really, really powerful work, right? When we shift in a physical way, when we shift in a mental and emotional way, we are shifting and granting other people the awareness that it can be done, right? We're showing them a new way that they can show up. We're showing them the areas where they may have not even recognized that there was something off, right? How many times do you pick up that book and you're like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that there was, something called a mother wound. Of course, right? And so some of these lines that we talk about are about these mother wounds, these shadow pictures, these inner child wounds, right? Because they're so prevalent right now in our society, because our society has been stuck in this loop for so long, right? And sweeping everyone else into it. So now, just like when we were speaking about earlier, those countries who families picked up and left, and then they had what we called a miasm form of a tubercular miasm where everybody was getting these chest infections, and now people in their downline get these bronchitis and asthma and chest afflictions, right? We're creating this new miasm in our culture because we're stuck, right? As a society, our past few generations are stuck, right? And here we are ready to shift it, right? It's being spoken about. We're bringing awareness to all of these different ways that we're stuck. And that is really, really incredible, because then we're able to shift it. Okay, and tomorrow I want to show you how to start shifting these things in our body, right? Our fascia is where we store these stories, where we store trauma, where we store injuries, experiences, right? But fascia is a processing ground. One of the other parts of that huge miasm that we're stuck in is this sedentary lifestyle, right? Where even when we're working out, even when we're up and moving, we're moving in the same dimensions, right? We're moving in the same paths, where we're not exploring different elements of movement. We're not unwinding and releasing the stuff that's stuck. And that's what's really necessary, right? Unwinding, allowing ourselves to bring awareness to the generational patterns, our own coping patterns, right? From our own injuries, our own experiences. We have all these things that come together and that influence the way that we show up in the world. And the way that we show up in the world is mirrored by the people around us, is mirrored by our children especially, right? We have children who are either doing exactly the same thing that we are doing, or they're doing exactly the opposite, right? Or sometimes they're coming up with their own little flavor, but it's so similar, right? The threads are the same. And what we want to stop is taking this, generational pattern of addiction, right? Even if you're not addicted, you are playing a role in that family generational pattern that we need to break so that it doesn't keep going. Okay, and I want to show you guys a little more tomorrow about how to drop into your body and begin releasing that stuff, what the fascia is all about. Right? I know there's only a couple of you on here right now and that you are hopping in and out, but does anybody have questions? I am going to leave this up for the rest of the week. It will be posted on YouTube if you have anybody who may, you may want to share this with who's not on Facebook. They will be up for the week so that you guys can replay them. I know some of you were hopping on. I'm very early today, so I know some of you were hopping on as you could, and I'm so grateful for you guys to be here and to show up. I would love if you guys would go watch the replay. If you were here live, you can hashtag and drop live. If you're watching the replay, hashtag replay. That helps us keep the video bumped to the top so that we can continue the conversation, right? Ask questions. Even if I don't know the answers, we have such a great community. We have such a beautiful wealth of knowledge where we can just call in other practitioners and ask them about it. If you have wisdom in your field, let us know what you do. Let us know what you can bring to this conversation and what you are thinking, right? Let me know if you're like, no, actually, I think that's all wrong. I think we're going this way, right? Let's start a conversation. Let's talk about it. That's what I love to be doing. All right. If you guys don't have any questions, I'm going to hop off, and I will be on later to come through and answer any questions that you guys may have, right? So check out your workbook, write down your biggest takeaways for today, and then share them with us, right? Share them with us on here. Okay? Thank you for showing up early with me. Thank you for allowing me to shift my schedule a bit. I will be popping on through the day to talk with you guys, and I'm so grateful for you guys to all be here. Have a good day.